Paniagua, and Driscoll. So let's actually start at the bottom because I think that'll be the simplest ones to go quickly. So if there's someone here from law, we can start with that item. Is there anyone from law to handle that one at the bottom? Is the fire department service bonds? You want to take that?
Hello everybody. I'm Chief Mons with the fire department. I worked in collaboration with the finance department with Mr. Brad O'Connor and Frank Kaliba. On the call with me today, I have Deputy Chief John Kane, who oversees our special operations, Lieutenant John McMahon, who works over at the fire station where our hazmat operations work out of, and First Deputy Chief Dan Downs, who worked at our rescue company for a dozen years. So essentially what this request is, often we are called outside of the county, outside of the city to deal with hazardous materials calls to mitigate those hazards, or if there's a technical rescue that is going on in another part of the region that is outside of the city. Based on our training and expertise with our firefighters, we are called in to come provide assistance. So we have a process in place that the different municipalities through the fire department, they request through the 911 center if they need help, and we kind of have a clearinghouse of figuring out if we can actually help them out and if we have the resources to help them out. So we do this often. And what we're looking to do is anything outside of the city be reimbursed based on established laws and statutes and procedures that are already in place to get reimbursed for different things, for materials, apparatus, labor, and equipment to actually reimburse the fire department to provide these services. And we do these services for our city all the time also. So there's an attached proposed fee schedule, and that's kind of the basis of this legislative requests. And I have everybody on the call that can answer any questions about this.
Chief, the fees that you're proposing, how do they compare to our costs? Are we making money on it? Are we breaking even? How does that?
I think where we're at right now will be breaking even. It'll be basically we're providing these services inside the city all the time, and you know, those are you know, paid for out of the tax base we're given and the budget that I'm given. But definitely these are above and beyond what a normal fire department does, and right now I think the fee schedule we have, we would be breaking even on some of these costs. And there's been definitely times in the past where I brought to the council before, we were called the Utica to actually help somebody get off of a training tower, off of a tower. I don't know if you remember that call that I brought up. And I talked to the chief. We asked a few questions to inquire whether if our services are going to actually make the situation better. So before we just send anybody off anywhere, they have to have a plan, and we have to be agreeable as the chief's office and the duty deputy chief to make sure we're sending our people and our equipment down to actually make a positive outcome. And if we can agree to that when we get the request, then we send our folks down. And particularly for that Utica call, we talked to the chief. They have a mechanism such as this legislation in place, so they were able to bill. Basically, they billed on our behalf, and then they got the money and they donated it back to our department. And so we would just like our own mechanism to have this money reimbursed as we're utilizing these services for other people.
So we do it now. We just don't necessarily have a mechanism in place to get reimbursed. So it would kind of be the same amount of times we'd be doing it. We just have a financial procedure in place going forward. Is that essentially what it is?
Definitely. We could definitely go on more of these calls. I'm hesitant to go on these calls because we don't have the resources to actually pay for them that like I would like to, but certainly when a neighboring jurisdiction has has hazardous materials call and they can't mitigate it, and it could be can actually result in the city being unsafe. There's two things. I want to make sure it doesn't affect our city and make it more hazardous for our citizens. But if we can go help a neighboring department or a neighboring jurisdiction, we have the capabilities. And I think under state law, we should be doing that with our mutual aid, a state law mutual aid plan that's in place. So we can, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. We can definitely expand this based on what our resources are and what we actually can recoup.
So how many times a year does this come up?
So typically I would say 50 to 55 times a year we get requests, approximately somewhere along those lines. Sometimes it's a phone call. We help mitigate the hazard and figure out what resources they have on scene, and we help them. We walk them through it over the phone. But when they are larger incidents, we need to have the people there to actually put them on scene to figure out what needs to happen to mitigate the situation.
Is there anything that would prevent us from charging an administrative fee to make money off it? I mean, my biggest thing is, we have the expertise and the equipment, and some of the surrounding towns don't have that. And, they're choosing not to invest in that and relying on the city to help them when they need it. It seems like there would be some ability for the city to, make some money off of that. But I guess, is that legal, or why are we not doing that?
So I think based on the home rule law, we can make whatever ordinance we would like. And I think this is up to the finance and the legal team to figure out where exactly this goes from here. But I think initially I presented this 2 years ago with some of the resource recovery and to try to recover some of our funds. Like I said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Not just recovering funds, there are other mechanisms where we should be getting money back. And I have Deputy Chief John Kane who can get into some of those different avenues, but certainly we could amend this ordinance to add whatever we would like as a city to recoup some of these costs that we are doing. And we could put some of these costs at a higher dollar amount, possibly to make a profit off of them. We could contract with different businesses inside or outside the city to provide these services, because if we don't go on these calls, these different companies or wherever we're being dispatched to, they have to pay somebody to mitigate these hazards. So we certainly could be more of a player in that realm if we would like.
Councilor Green, can I point something out? On the Okra board, I tried to look for ways to reimburse the fire department because they would respond if a fire occurred at the trash burning plant. I found out that because of mutual aid that we couldn't make that charge. Like in the town of Onondaga, Okra does pay that volunteer fire station some extra money to help respond. I did look into having the city reimbursed, and I was told because of mutual aid responses that we couldn't bill that charge, but I did look into it.
Well, to the clerk's point, I believe that's just for fire suppression, not necessarily for hazardous materials. From the information that we gathered, we believe that we would be able to bill for those types of situations.
Chief, I wasn't questioning what you're putting forward. I thought Councilor Green was talking about billing for any response. That's why I mentioned it, not for.
Okay. Well, sorry for the confusion. But we can speak about this more specifically about the different avenues to recoup funding and the different laws and the different agencies that recommend that we do this. So I'll let Chief John Kane and John McMahon speak about it a little bit, if that's what you like, Councilor Green.
Yeah, I think maybe it's something to just look at in the future. I think it's just that our costs, when we literally go out to do this work, it's our time and whatever the materials we're using are, but baked into those costs are the fact that we've spent all this time and resources training our guys and buying the equipment and stuff like that, that may not be reflected in the actual costs. So that's what I just want to make sure that we're all getting compensated for, all that work that goes into being able to respond to something.
Sure. So I'll let Chief King talk about some of that stuff.
Yes, sir. So the fee schedule that we put in place is based currently on we looked at the FEMA equipment replacement schedule, which is FEMA sets guidelines for what you should be charging for reimbursement for lost equipment or consumables, things like that. And we also averaged in, like, for, some of the items in there were a small hazmat response, a larger incident. We were basing that on what our personnel costs would be based on how long we expect to be on the scene. Some hazmat incidents are mitigated in just, 20 minutes. If we have just a fuel spill from your garden variety car accident, we don't have a lot of personnel expenditures associated with that. But if we go to, say, a train car derailment, that's going to be very manpower intensive. We're going to use a lot of equipment. So we based our fee schedule on that. And I do agree with you that we have invested a lot of time and money in training our hazmat response team, which currently covers a tri-county area. So I think this is an opportunity to build the infrastructure for resource recovery. And then down the road, I think we can look at what our actual expenses are as we are providing a service that literally no one else in Onondaga County can cover, nor Madison County, nor most of Oswego County. So there's a lot of value in that. And I think that's certainly a discussion to be had down the road. You're right. We have invested a lot of time and money in our personnel. Nobody else has the training that we do in this part of the state.
Questions from other
Just maybe it's because I just got back on the council last year, but I mean, so we haven't been doing this. We haven't been asking for reimbursement, correct? Or have we?
You're correct. We have not. We informally, people donate different products back, and I can let John McMahon talk about that. But if we go up to SU, sometimes they might, donate a particular item that we use if they have it on hand. But certainly we have no mechanism to formally request the resources that we've used at all.
Chief, I'm just saying, I mean, outside the city, I mean, when we have to respond to one of those 55 incidences, we don't send them a bill. We never have. No, okay.
We never have. We never
So
had a mechanism.
So obviously in this vehicle, we would probably, maybe to our surrounding neighbors and brothers and sisters, we would at least let them know that this might be the case if they request our services, correct? Has the city hall thought about that?
Certainly, Councilor Hogan, and I think there's some stipulations based on law and different statutes that are in place where, depending on what the material is that we're going to mitigate, whoever is the owner of that material is legally responsible for the mitigation of that. So the gentlemen with me in the room right now have done all the research, and they actually live this every day. So I'll let them speak about that. But whoever is in, if you own a business and you have a hazardous material on site, if you don't control that properly, when that gets out of hand, it's your responsibility to actually pay to make sure that situation is mitigated. So I'll let John McMahon speak about that right now.
Yes.
Just before John talks, I mean, I don't envision a situation where we're haggling over a emergency situation where, some surrounding entity would need our hazmat crew or something like that. I'm just saying that we're just talking about a vehicle to recoup some of our expenses, correct? That's what we're talking about, right?
Yes, initially that's what we're talking about, just recouping some of our resources that we're using right now outside the city.
So yes, sir, Councilor Hogan, it is a bit confusing as well in terms of hazardous materials. We're not billing the municipality that calls us. So as a hypothetical, if say the Liverpool Volunteer Fire Department requested us, according to a couple pieces of legislation, one of them is CERCLA, or the Superfund Act, and the other is called the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. We can't bill Liverpool, but when that material was released, somebody was responsible for it. They're deemed the responsible party, and that is who we would be looking to recoup costs from. So in terms of hazardous materials response, we would not be billing any local municipality.
Okay,
it would be
excellent.
a responsible party.
Okay, thank you. That explains it. Excellent.
Mr. Auditor, do you have a question?
Thank you, Counselor. So Chief, and I understand the not charging back in terms of the resources, but when we talk about personnel, what if any of our personnel are injured in the process and they go on to 207A? Who compensates for that?
So there's a 209 general municipal law for mutual aid, and I believe the municipality that is sending the person will be responsible for that. But I'll get the factual information on that and get that over to you, Auditor. But I believe that's how it reads in the state statute of state mutual aid with fire service.
So if I understand you correctly, then the city would be responsible for any disability and we'd be also disability costs plus the lack of resource, correct?
That's correct. I'll confirm that information with you, and I'll get the statute and the law, and I will definitely confirm that back with you. But I believe, if my recollection is correct, that the agency that is sending the personnel will be responsible for any injuries that occur.
Okay, thank you kindly.
You're welcome.
Councilman, Mr. Auditor, I had a flashback for a second.
Happens all the time.
This was kind of my concern, material costs, okay, legal requirements aside, we're still talking about personnel, we're still talking about our labor resources. It just seems a little, I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, especially considering that we're a city that oftentimes, in dealing with personnel, dealing with, union issues and costs associated with the same. I don't know how we don't seek a reimbursement for that specifically, or that we don't, I just don't, I don't know how I'm thinking about this right now. It just doesn't seem equitable for our city, certainly as it relates to the most immediate neighboring towns. I get if there's any, requirement in terms of know-how, Chief, and who may have the capacity to deal with a certain issue. But I did hear Utica mentioned, which is quite a distance from here. And I'm not sure how the same applies there, and even still, the cost for personnel is primary on my mind. And again, to the auditor's credit, the idea that we would absorb the cost for an injury for one of our personnel somewhere else while helping someone else, that one kind of escapes me a little bit.
So you bring up 2 points, Councilman Bay. The first point is recouping costs on personnel. We looked at 2 different departments, Utica and Rochester, who both bill for hazardous materials response. They are our closest neighbors that are capable of providing the same resource. Both of them bill. Rochester had a billing schedule similar to ours. They only billed when they would for manpower when they would request overtime. So if they dropped below minimum staffing and had to bring in technicians, they would bill. Whereas Utica billed for everything. When Utica responds for hazardous materials, they would bring in personnel off duty, pay them overtime, and work that into the cost of the bill. So their bills, the bills that they sent me anyway, were approximately 60% of their cost was in overtime. So they were always using off-duty staff pulled in to work overtime on these calls and go outside the city. In speaking within the chief's office, the feeling was that Rochester was a model that was more similar to what we currently do, and that as a starting point, we may choose to use the Rochester model rather than Utica, which would we would have to build the apparatus for having people come in. Apparatus not as in a vehicle, but we'd have to build a system to recall staff the way that Utica does to do it. So I think the feeling was to do what Rochester does. There is in the line about major incidents for hazardous materials billing. Yes, that would fall under the caveat underneath where it says administrative costs. That does leave us some wiggle room to bill for staffing if we had to bring people in on overtime to respond. So I guess, and this would be, the decision from the chief's office is that if the decision to send people on overtime was there, we could recoup that cost with the policy.
Yeah, I'm not making a case for overtime in no way whatsoever. I happen to agree with, it's obviously logical to seek reimbursement for persons who would work overtime. It just seems to me that we're missing an opportunity for savings, even for persons who are working on our current clock. I understand that the logic is we're paying them anyway, but we pay them, for taxpayers here pay them for what they do here. And it just seems that, we may be missing an opportunity for savings. And so I think that has to be considered in some way.
Council, this is Chief Mons, and I will say since 2018, I've been here just looking at a lot of different things. I brought a few of them to the council, and I totally agree. I think some of these services that we provide, the city's been getting the short end of the stick, and I think trying to present legislation like this kind of gets us in the right direction to move forward to actually compensate for some of these things. And I think to what you were saying, if the neighbors are calling and they need our help based off of the different mutual aid agreements with the state law under the General Municipal Law 209, I believe, if we have the trained people, we should be responding to these calls. And I think this was in place, long before I became the chief, but I totally agree that we should be looking to do more than break even for these services that we provide. And whether that's including backfill into these labor costs when we send somebody out of the city to deal with these situations. And maybe that would be a part of what the ordinance will be, that, the backfill is going to be paid for also by whoever is responsible for that spill. Because certainly most of these spills happen at stationary places, railroads, highways, all the things that we see all the time in our region. So these situations occur. And I think the biggest benefit of our hazmat team is that right in our city, we mitigate any hazard that happens in our city, which we rarely hear about it because the team is so fast in their response to deal with these situations. And I think as a fire chief, I think we should still be going on these calls if it's a reasonable request. And I think to be able to get refunded, to your point, Councilor Bay, that's my goal, to actually make it so it's worth our while to be involved in these situations.
Chief, I can understand that, but it's not our money we're using. And so we have to take into account our condition and the fact that we're using taxpayers' money and it's a taxpayer service. So I understand your point. Even still, we're missing an opportunity for savings that I think requires some consideration.
Any other questions on this item? All right, so for the other members of the Finance Committee, Councilors Hogan and Bay, you want to move this forward?
Yes. Yes, Counselor.
Yes.
All right, so this one passes. From API, Nico.
Good afternoon. We are requesting the Council's approval to enact the Memorandum of Understanding with the Government Performance Lab, which is an organization that operates out of Harvard Kennedy School. As you know, municipalities, as part of their day-to-day operations, have to purchase a variety of items and services. The GPL is one of the leading institutions when it comes to procurement, and what they preach is the adoption of results-driven contracting. That is, taking a strategic, data-driven approach to some of the key procurement efforts that we, as a city, conduct. As part of this collaboration, which is offered through a pro bono partnership as part of Syracuse continued engagement in the What Works Cities initiative, funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies. GPL will embed a fellow to work with the city and identify at least one upcoming procurement and define objectives, engage the marketplace, measure appropriate data, and develop an RFP. The immediate positive outcome of this would be to take said key procurement and through the results-driven contracting lens, achieve a better deal for us as a city or better outcomes in whatever services we're looking to provide. However, as part of the scope of work, I'm looking at it in a more big picture way, we're looking at ways throughout this process to improve our procurement process in the city in general and adapt some of these practices as standard, for which we hope GPL will issue recommendations at the end of this engagement.
Any questions on this item?
It's that little school up in Boston, right? Harvard?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard of it before.
Are the members of the Finance Committee comfortable with this item?
Yes, we are. Yes, I am.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Nico.
Thank
I
you.
guess before we go to the tech garden, so the law one, is anyone here from law? If not, this one seems like it's a clerical thing of just a name change, so I'm comfortable moving this. And then if there is some controversy, we can look at it in the full meeting, but it looks pretty pro forma. So, councilors, are you okay with that law item?
Yes, I am, Counselor.
Yes.
Thanks. Okay, the last one is the tech garden lease, so I'll turn that over. Is this coming from assessment, or who wants to explain this one?
Good afternoon, councilors. David Clifford, Commissioner of Assessment. Yeah, this is a request to authorize a new lease for the Tech Garden site in order to enable Center State to expand the Tech Garden vertically. And they have a plan to build a couple of more stories on top of the existing building and expand the incubator, their services in that respect. There are people here from Center State and people from NBD that could answer any specific questions you have.
So, I mean, I think the first question I have, and we've discussed this, but I mean, is it the administration's position that $1 a year is a reasonable lease rate for this?
That was the rate that they've been paying all along for the past many years. And I believe that was decided to be the rate going forward.
Then my other question is, the summary of it says that it's restricted to use for a incubator space, but some of the renderings I've seen have like an outdoor rooftop venue. So is that still part of the plans, or what's the story with that part?
Councilor Green, this is Kevin Schwab. I can speak to that a little bit. Yes, we, as we had discussed, we certainly reached out to our neighbors, particularly across the street with the hotel. We also talked with tenants of the Tech Garden regarding things that they would want to do there, as well as community events that we already do, things like Drones Over Downtown, Tech Meets Taste, etc. And so incorporating that kind of a space into a new design is something that made sense for the tenants, made sense for the operation of the Tech Garden itself, and is something that, in fact, another asset that our community has invested a lot in, the Marriott across the street, said it's something that they might be able to utilize as well from time to time.
Received says the lease prohibits any revenue generating activity outside of the incubation. So amended, or how? So where does that fall in?
It's my understanding that this would be incorporated into the language of the lease.
All right. Do other councilors have questions? in this one.
Kevin, what do you charge per square foot there to these entrepreneurs?
Caitlin Moriarty is on the line with us. She can speak to that better than I can, but I can tell you it is below market. Go ahead, Caitlin.
What?
Sure. Hi, counselors. Caitlin Moriarty here. So we charge between $8 to $14 per square foot, depending on the startup stage of business.
Okay, and Caitlin, that would include the new floor. If I knew the second floor, that would be the same amount.
Correct. We are anticipating charging the same amount per square foot, regardless of floor.
So I guess we tell the taxpayers that here in the city is that we charge because you charge such a low rate. We in recognition of all the good work you do as far as creating an atmosphere and a place for these young folks to, or I imagine they're young folks or new entrepreneurs to start their businesses. We in turn only charge you $1. We couldn't get a percentage and work a percentage deal, and you could charge a couple extra dollars per square foot. Just spitballing here.
Sure. No, and I appreciate the question. So I can tell you now, even with our current, even our more mature startups, who are paying and who are able to pay the $14 per square foot, density being a wonderful example, and I'm sure you've heard, raise a significant round this year. Even in our conversations, we've asked, even considering buying additional commercial space, that going above that $14 per square foot would be a financial burden for that startup. So this price per square foot is based on what we are seeing our startups are able to pay as they launch their companies.
Okay, and I know Kevin did give me the assessment, the engineering assessment about the garage, and it seems to be of course, that was an engineering firm that you hired, that we would be okay structurally, and I'm assuming that Commissioner Clifford, that all the insurance, there's no liability inherent in us with this lease, correct? I mean, they give us a policy that has us additionally insured, the city.
Correct. That's standard in any leases of city-owned property. Yes.
Do we have any other city-owned property that we charge $1 for here? Dave,
Yeah, yes, we do. For example, the community centers.
You mean, well, you're talking about like Westcott and places like that, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
As well as Webster's Pond. There are other things, usually where there's some public good being done by another party.
Okay, but not any kind of large facility like this, correct?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Councilor Green.
Other councilors?
Yeah, Kevin, we talked before. I'll reiterate what I had mentioned in our group discussion on Zoom. Councilor Green was there as well. Just that, you guys had demonstrated based on questions we asked, some businesses that we retained here in the city and some employment that they provided. We talked, though, about what I thought needed to be a more deliberate effort to hire people specifically in the city. And I'll reiterate that point. There's a difference between creating jobs and shifting jobs. What we often do, I'm not putting this just on the tech garden, but what often happens here is that when businesses move into downtown or shift around, the working people shift, but there's usually no increase in employment because there's no decrease in unemployment in our city. And so I think if it's a matter of real benefit to be had, certainly going forward, and this I'm saying with the understanding, one of the concerns I have with the constant efforts to train, we've been training people long before I got elected, and they often get certified and still don't get jobs. But we need some real deliverables in this respect, something tangible that we could write home about, you know. So we've talked about this in our discussions, and clearly from Councilor Hogan's line of questions, he has the same concern. But I just so wherever we can find balance in there, we need to try to find it. Thanks, Councilor
Bay, Councilor Bay, I think your point is incredibly well made. It is something that we have, I think, seen that benefit to date. I think there are chances to increase that benefit, and be more intentional than we have been. You certainly look at a company like TCG Player, right? A company that didn't exist just a few years ago at all. When they were in the tech garden, a handful of employees, 10 employees. They've continued to grow. They're now 350 employees, with their primary location right there on Warren Street, just up the block really from the tech garden. And more than 40%, almost 45% of the employees who work there are city residents. We have similar figures from places like Digital Hive, places like SpinCar. These are new jobs, right? They didn't just move from somewhere. They are the benefit that has been created from the work that's being done at the Tech Garden by Caitlin and her team day in and day out. The $17 million that we're looking to put into this project, into this asset for the city, really should increase our capability to produce more densities, more spin cars, more TCG players, more digital hives. And we're doing that now with a level of intentionality towards city residents, as evidenced by the work that we're doing, for example, with JPMC, by some of the programs that we've seen develop now over the last few years in the city school district. I know I spoke with Councilor Hogan and with you about one of the recent just sort of moments of pride that we have, because we now have one of the best drone programs of any public school system in the country, full stop. Not the best of an urban public school district, really the best of any in the country. And now we have kids before they've even graduated high school who are getting FAA licensure, something that is normally goes to kids in college or to people who are adults and in their careers in engineering, with engineering backgrounds. So we are seeing some of those benefits. We know we have to work to increase them even further, and we think that this investment is going to allow us to do that.
Kevin, I can appreciate that, and that was a presentation, minus the presentation on the drone operators that we've heard before. And again, I don't challenge the idea of, I'm gonna crack a joke here. I haven't seen any stats. I've just been told by you. But I haven't, I'm not challenging the idea of how many people of TCG player live in the city and the like. But even still, I think we have to define, when we say that we benefit, we got to define we. That may not apply to those, 15, 20,000 unemployed persons who've been looking for work for, the past, I don't know how many years. And so, while we can, I always use the example of adding copper piping to, granite with holes in it, it doesn't really solve our issue. We need a greater effort to do overhaul on our system. And so, and again, we don't put all of this on companies like TCG Player and the like, but I think I'm speaking for all of the elected officials here, when we talk about work opportunity and training, and placement, we're talking about the many people here who've been looking for jobs, who've had, either obsolete skills because manufacturing has gone away, or persons who just may, be unskilled, but who still have families to care for, but are largely dependent on public assistance and similar types of programs. We need to give those people work opportunities. Those are the people who have been here long before TCG Player. They didn't move here for a job, and so those are the ones we're most concerned about, not to discount anybody But I just want to be clear about what I'm saying. And, I applaud the effort, and I've always been a fan of the Tech Garden. But even still, whatever we can do to create a greater equity for taxpayers here is what we have to do.
Thank you. So, Kevin, we talked about this. My position on this, I'm very supportive of the Tech Garden. I think it's a benefit to the community. So I like that. And I understand that incubators are inherently not super profitable organizations. So I think the $1 a year rent is something that I'm philosophically okay with. But I do believe there's an opportunity here for this to have positive revenue and to be profitable. And I think the event venue is part of that, but I also think there's other opportunities. So, my position from the beginning is that I think this should be a percentage-based lease where Center State pays $1 a year, but if there is profit that the city and Center State shares equally, and I'm just putting it out there for everyone else. I think your position on that is that that's not something you want to do, and that all the money should go to Center State in the situation that there's a profit. Is that correct?
Well, it's not something we've ever seen. It's not something we in any way want to mislead anyone into believing that we anticipate. The best incubators in the world are not profit centers. The best incubators in the world turn out great companies and never make a dime. That's the situation the Tech Garden has been in. We have grown, we've invested with our members' money, we've invested with foundation money. We've made a point of pulling together money from numerous sources, including the state, for this expansion into an asset that we will never own, right? And including not only the expansion, but redoing all the mechanical, enhancing accessibility of the Tech Garden, which, as you know, is not inherently accessible right now, given the nature of the way it's situated, as well as the functionality of the space to advance the opportunities here for high growth companies that leverage technology and are going to be the backbone of our economy going forward. And we already see signs of that. So no, we don't ever anticipate that we are going to make a penny. And on the off chance that we do, we think that there needs to be recognition that we're putting $17 million investment into a city asset with no risk to the city whatsoever.
So I think the obvious question is if there's not any anticipated profit, then why be opposed to profit sharing? I think those two things are in conflict.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll agree with no risk either. Anytime we don't make money from a viable asset, there's risk. But let me add this, Kevin, something else that we talked about. And I can't remember what the answer was or what the reply was. Maybe one of you can. But I asked about if there were obligations for the businesses who would come through the incubator to exist in the city for a certain amount of time. I don't know if you remember that question. And I don't know if there was an answer to that. But, that is certainly one way the city can get a return on investment. If a business, outgrows the incubator, move into an area and has an obligation to exist here, pay taxes here and the like for a certain amount of time, then, maybe we feel a little better about it, but I can't, again, I can't remember what the response was to that.
So Councilor Bay, Councilor Bay, the short answer to that is it depends. There are programs where there are residency requirements. For example, our Genius New York program, which is focused on unmanned systems and has been a big driver of the drone industry growth that we have seen here. So with that, there is a 1-year residency requirement for those companies that are part of the Genius New York program. What we have found in the industry when you're looking at incubators, if you have long-term residency requirements, you don't attract the best companies. What we have done is say we're going to use that year to make this place so sticky in terms of assets, in terms of the networks they build, in terms of the suppliers that they engage, in terms of the supports that we're providing, that they don't want to leave. And Caitlin and her team have been remarkably successful with that exact strategy. And we have a very, very high retention rate in the city for these companies. And that's true for those that are not in the Genius program as well. It's the same strategy. But in terms of requirements, the Genius program, for example, has a requirement. Those who come in through other doors may not have the same requirements, but the strategy is absolutely the same. Make it sticky. Make them where they want to stay, where this is where it's the path that makes them most efficient, most effective, ultimately most profitable, and they'll stay. And that's what we've seen happen.
Kevin, if I could, we're all fans of your mission here, and it's just to this committee, along with the city administration, sat in on lately during this COVID crisis, where we had to literally cut, we had a $43 million deficit over the last fiscal year. And we've had to make decisions about laying off people and furloughing people and cutting programs and talking to constituents who basically understood the problems that we've had to face financially. And so it's incumbent of us to ask these questions about a city facility that we would give you for $1 a year, but generates income. I mean, you generate income, and all we are is asking for you, if you make money, could we share it? And that's basically what we're asking. And I think that's a very reasonable question, not only asked, but I can't understand your reluctance to sort of go along with that. So,
Councilor Hogan, I appreciate the question, and it was funny because I'm not going to be snarky here, so just consider it as the lighthearted in a lighthearted way that I'm saying.
I've refrained, but Kevin, I've refrained from it all meetings so far. So if you want to have at it.
But no, all I was going to say is, we'll split the profit after the $17 billion that we put in, right?
Kevin, is it all your money, or are you getting money from other state entities, for example?
Oh no, we absolutely went out and solicited money from the state, right? I mean, that's not nothing. We absolutely went out and got money from foundations, and we've absolutely gone out and gotten money from our members that supports this work year in and year out. And the reality is that we don't come close to breaking even. This is subsidized by us every year. And I cannot say that enough. And so we're coming before the council, and the reason we need the lease extension is that those that are providing the money are going to look at us and say, well, if you've only got this for another 10 years, that's not enough to amortize, right, to depreciate the amount of money that we're giving. The investment that's being made will not satisfy the funders, and that becomes the problem.
And Kevin, can you give me the breakdown of the 17?
I don't have the breakdown in front of me. I can get it for you. The largest percentage of that is from the state, though.
Apologies. Can we be reminded of what the tax generation would be if that property was online and performing at its full potential? Mr. Clifford?
Counselor, I'll have to look that up, and I will get that to each of the members of the committee.
Yeah, I can't recall the exact number, but I remember harping on it a little bit. So I'm wondering if our in-kind investment is included in that 17 million, Kevin.
One of the aspects of this puzzle too, counselors, is, we are grant-based. We have grant-based income. We have earned revenue streams. All of those earned revenue streams go right back into assisting startups. We have very capital-intensive startups in the clean technology space and the unmanned system space. So all that to say, any revenue we do try and earn, and any attempts we make, and to Kevin's point, we never come anywhere near breaking even, but any attempt to add to these earned revenue drivers is so that we can continue to support these startups. So the higher we have any earned revenue, the higher the likelihood of these startups succeeding. And to Kevin's point, we don't have an obligation for them to stay, but many of them choose to stay, and there is certainly encouragement to continue to utilize the Central New York resources that we've laid out for them. So.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think many of us understand that, right? You provide a space at, downtown at a respectable cost per square footage, and you have to, you're covering the upkeep and you're providing resources and the like for them. I believe the thought that some of the councils may be having is somebody's making money, and so while Center State may not be that entity that's, accruing any profits, somebody is. And I'm just, maybe saying what some are thinking. But does this go back to the point about, here's the tough part. When you come and you ask for a parcel of that size for a lease of that size for $1 a year, you got to at least look like you're considering what we're saying. Now, a requirement to stay for a while. When we talk about a return on investment in terms of people getting opportunity here, it has to at least sound like that's being considered. It can't sound like, we don't know. That can't be a response.
Councilor Bay, it's interesting when you say somebody's making money. I'm willing to bet that, well, certainly when we talk about the companies that we're producing, they're for profit. And when those companies populate up and down Warren Street the way they have, I think the city's the one making money.
That's a stretch. Populate.
That is, well, again, we're talking about just the companies I've listed are somewhere in the neighborhood collectively of 1,000 jobs, right?
Yeah, I would have to see those numbers.
Hundreds of thousands of square.
We don't have a decrease in unemployment that would match that number you just gave. In fact, our unemployment went up. So come on.
When you talk
doesn't lie.
Well, no, what I'm saying, but it's a great example, right? Now let's think about the place that they've gone. When you think about the place that they've gone, we lamented the future of Warren Street when Excellus picked up and left with 800 jobs. Right? We were all here for that. It is because of the work of the Tech Garden, right? It's because of the investment that has been made in the Tech Garden, that we've all made, that we now can point to these companies that have been produced here and have now gone in and filled that space and then some. In turn, not the same physical space in that building, but you know what I mean, space up and down Warren Street, for example. So yes, if all things would have stayed the same, and again, I point to Excellus because it was such a big shock to downtown. But it was also at the time when this pivot really happened, right? They leave, and now you see where this next generation of companies is coming in to fill behind, right? And again, I point to TCG just because it's the biggest and most visible example. But a company that was an idea, and then a handful of people, and then 10 people, and now 350 people. This is the benefit that is coming out of that. Though the revenue that they're paying in rent is absolutely translating into revenue for the city. The jobs that 45% of whom have gone to city residents are absolutely benefits accruing to the city. And I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. I was cutting you off actually, so that's my fault. The thing is, and I just want to point something out to you real quick, if I could. Give me 1 second. So part of the when you say a number like 1,000 jobs, I'm just practical here. Let's go pre-COVID. Right, 10.7% unemployment, and a report that came out not too long before COVID hit. And this population of just over 142,000, that's just over 15,300 people. And so if we had a 2.8% drop in unemployment, we would have seen that. So this is why I'm saying there's a difference between shifting jobs and creating jobs for unemployed people, and it doesn't take away the idea that there's a potential benefit, but this speaks to, I think, that the the kind of the demand that myself and others are making when we talk about a return on investment. The benefit to us come when people who've been here get employed. This is not to say we don't want new people moving in, certainly, but it doesn't solve our issue if we still have a mass number of starving, unemployed, able-bodied persons who don't have the skill set to work at TCG Play and others. So, this is why I made the, and we did talk about this, Kevin, efforts to incorporate, right, people who live here into meaningful training, leading to actual placement. That has to become a part of it. I think, part of a number of our issue, and forgive me, anybody, if I'm putting words in your mouth, is that, we would rather, hear something that's a little bit more definite, than I don't, kind of like the maybe kind of response. I yield, Councilor Green.
Thanks, Councilor. So we're right up on the end of our hour here. So, my position on this, I like the tech garden and I understand the challenges of operating that kind of venue. I don't support a lease that doesn't have a profit sharing with the city. That's how I'm going to vote on it. But I'm also comfortable if the members of this committee want to move it to the full council. I'm fine with that. So I'll leave it to Councilors Hogan and Bay how you want to proceed with that.
I feel the same way as you, Councilor Green, but or maybe I feel comfortable forwarding it to the council and letting my fellow councilors vote on it too. Without a revenue sharing agreement, I will vote no on this. So,
Councilor Bay.
I'm willing to move it to the agenda just to see what the others think. And that's all I have to say at this point. But if the rest of you are okay with moving it to the agenda, so be it.
Okay, that's fine with me. So, all right, that'll conclude our meeting. We're going to move all 4 of the items forward to the full agenda. So thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you,